All right, welcome back to Problem Solver Politics. I am your host, Cardin Ellis, with Cody the Oracle.
Hey everyone, how you doing?
And today we're going to talk about what Andrew Yang would have to do, in our humble opinions, to win 2020, or at least in mine. We're going to go over the psychology of voting, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and recent data that's come out over the past two election cycles about a phenomenon that's commonly known in the psychological community as authoritarianism. And what I believe Andrew Yang would have to adjust in order to excel in both the primaries and the debates anywhere that he is in front of the eyes of the voters. And we're going to go over a lot of primary sources here, and we're going to go over a lot of scientific analyses of these phenomena and how they affect us when we're voting. So I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and in a couple of Andrew Yang's performances, I don't feel like he's done as well publicly in these forums as other candidates have, and they look better than their ideas are, while Andrew Yang is looking lesser than his ideas are. And I'm wondering, how do we bridge that gap? Okay, so first we're going to go over some science here, okay? You got to read a book I'll recommend after this podcast is over by Brian Kaplan called The Myth of the Rational Voter. All of us think that we approach elections very rationally and reasonably, but the truth is, if we are honest with ourselves and when the data is honest with us, we are both simultaneously tribalistic and emotional when we vote. In a previous podcast, we talked about the increased phenomena of negative voting, where people since 2008 have showed up a higher percentage every year to vote against an opposing candidate more than they wish to vote for their party or their team's candidate. That's a phenomenon called negative voting. Now, what we're going to do is dive into the science of what voters think when they go to the booth in accordance with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and recent studies that have been done on authoritarianism. We'll actually reference a very interesting Vox video that was done on the subject. We'll completely interpret differently their data because Vox is only capable of calling authoritarian voters racist and Trump supporters racist and so on and so forth. But then we'll also analyze how the natural responses to candidates that have won very tight races illuminate our understanding as to how those tight races are won. And we'll actually go over a brief interview that Rick Scott did with the Daily Caller that illustrates his understanding of how American candidates win elections with American voters. So first we're going to start out, and you know what, Cody, can we begin actually with the Rick Scott YouTube clip? If we could start at the 23-second mark and go to about a minute and see Rick Scott, who won a very tight race in Florida, where it was down to literally the hundreds of ballots in Broward County in 2018. Let's see what he has to say about how tight races are won and how candidates win elections.
Ran and whatever. They care about it. The way I look at it is jobs, but the truth is they want to have independence. We all want to. I mean, you want to be independent, right? We all want to be independent. You don't want to be dependent on somebody else. That's number one. Number two is the future is their kids. They want their kids to get a good education. And number three is they want to be safe. So one of the reasons why the president's doing well in Florida right now is because he's focused on safety. He's focused on, people understand, you don't have a border, you have less safety. All right? There's wonderful people that want to come to our country, and they should, because this is the greatest economy in the world. But there's also terrorists that want to come to our country. There's people who want to sell drugs into our country. Do we want to stop those to help take care of all our families? Yeah. So I think it's three things. I think it's one, jobs, two, education, three, it's public safety. But on top of that, why don't we fix healthcare? Why don't we?
You can quit it right here. That's after the minute mark. But he goes on here, and what were the three things that he named, Cody? He actually started out, and he did say, yeah, some of it's jobs. People always want to jump to the jobs train and everything like that, you know. But he mentioned that I want to protect my children. I want to feel safe. And then he specifically did reference, for example, a very contentious hot button issue right now is immigration. And he said, yes, let's talk about immigration. You'll notice that he didn't say, oh, I don't like people of that color of skin. No, he said, this is a great country and many good people want to come here. But I want to make sure that the threatening element isn't allowed in. Okay? And then he goes on to say what? Could we start it again really fast just to repeat?
Give me 1 second.
He skips right over just the economic argument.
Right? We all want to be independent. You don't want to be dependent on somebody else. That's number one. Number two is the future is their kids. They want their kids to get a good education. And number three is they want to be safe.
Okay, let's stop.
One of the reasons why
so the first thing is they want to be independent, which basically means they want to be able to provide for themselves. Evolutionarily, this is programmed into us. Mothers want to be able to provide a secure environment for their children, their offspring. This is evolutionary, okay? Men want to provide for their offspring, for their families, a safe environment. Okay, so that's what independence is. Second, what was the second thing he mentioned?
Yeah, children, raising your kids.
Raising your children. Another evolutionary thing that is programmed into us, okay? And then the third thing was...
That's all you, man.
Oh, go back if you could. I don't want to misquote him. I would like to actually have it be his words.
On, people understand you don't have a border, you have less safety. Right? There's wonderful people that want to come to our country, and they should, because this is the greatest economy in the world. But there's also terrorists that want to come to our country. There's people who want to sell drugs into our country. Do we want to stop those to help take care of all our families? Yeah. So I think it's three things. I think it's one, jobs, two, education, three, is public safety. But on top of that,
okay, so jobs, education, public safety. He actually changed what he'd said first in the beginning. But this goes to the base of something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Any of us that have had to endure a minor in psychology, like I had to, actually I shouldn't say endure, I very much enjoyed it, are familiar with a sometimes controversial but very well-known psychological graph or icon or diagram called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you look at this hierarchy of needs, okay, it's like a pyramid. And the strongest part of the pyramid is the base. Cody, what are the bottom three, shall we say, bottom three categories in this pyramid that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Well, the first one, and I think rightfully so, physiological needs. I mean, just physically what you need to survive. Food, water, warmth, and rest. If you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't drink, you're not going to live very long.
Sounds a lot like Rick Scott's independence. Okay, keep going.
Well, I mean, you literally cannot survive or function without those things. I want to give Rick Scott credit for saying you need food to live.
No, I'm just saying that he naturally was saying what we naturally know.
Next step would be safety. Security, so you have to be safe and feel secure.
Okay.
Then goes to belongingness and love needs, so intimate relationships and friendships, esteem needs, and then finally self-actualization will be the top of the.
Okay. Now this is what I want us to do. At the very top is self-actualization. Below it is love and belonging and all this nice hippy-dippy stuff. And if you actually look at this graph, you can almost see what liberals focus on first at the top, and what oftentimes Republicans or authoritarians focus on first at the bottom. It's almost as though, just like we have an inner cortex in our brain that generates our principal emotions that is then regulated by our outer cortex in order to function in our daily lives, as voters, as human beings, we have base instincts, okay, that are then leading to the tip of this pyramid that are more refined instincts. But you'll notice the Democrats are doing what? In all of the debates, they're rushing to appeal to the smaller portions of the pyramid, the less powerful portions of the pyramid, a sense of belonging.
Well, what about healthcare? Where does healthcare fall on that list? Democrats are big on healthcare. I would say healthcare.
No, I'll tell you, that's the only thing.
Safety and security, right?
That's the only thing that I think is part of the base of the pyramid that Democrats do drum on a lot. But when they start talking about their utopian vision of America, when they start vilifying Americans for doing the America first thing, or else wanting to provide for citizens first instead of the non-citizens, and instead of calling that simple pragmatic prioritization, calling it racism, what they're doing is they are ostracizing people who are simply trying to cover their base needs first. And just as Rick Scott said, I won the election in 2020. Why? Because I think it's these three things first that voters want. And he was right. At the end of the day, when asked between, for example, independence or, shall we say, good behavior, many people in all of our largest voting blocks will say, like, the good behavior. Many people oftentimes, when asked the freedom or security argument, unfortunately will opt for security, okay? Because our security is oftentimes perceived in a chaotic time as higher, not a higher, but a more base need in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So basically, the only reason why I'm going deep into this data is because right now, I think outside of Joe Biden sometimes, Kamala Harris sometimes, nobody, every once in a while, Kristen Gillibrand, nobody is coming across as a strongman leader that appeals to the authoritarian desires of most voters, that in a time of chaos, such as this rapid change in our economy that's been going on over the past 10 years. We are going through a very rapidly changing world post-internet, okay? And when there is chaos around, whether it be economic, military, or social, the man who is the strong man leader in the room is the one that's going to win, whether he is benevolent or whether he is evil, and you need to come across as the strong man. Other terms for this are the law and order candidate. There has never been an election where law and order was on the ballot when the law and order candidate did not win. Look at George W. Bush during the violence epidemic, okay, of the late 80s. You're dealing with a law and order candidate. Look at Richard Nixon during the 60s, promising that law and order. All of these guys win when there is chaos and you seem like you will be a law and order candidate. So what does this have to do with Andrew Yang? Okay. Let's study a little bit of authoritarianism. Now, we're going to watch a little bit of a Vox video here. Now, you can watch the original Vox video, and they're basically just going to tell you that authoritarianism means that you like racist leaders. And that's an absolute misinterpretation of the psychological phenomena of authoritarian leaders. But authoritarianism is a psychological view that is very bipartisan, and many people across the board have. And if I were to put into layman's terms, it would be a general gravity of somebody towards a strongman leader that seems like they are going to bring order into a world of chaos. So when threatened, they will want to give something that they have to this leader in order to bring what they believe is the security he offers back into their life. In this case, it may be a vote. I'll give you my vote, and then hopefully you'll become my leader and my world will become more secure. Other times, it's actually giving up a freedom. I think we gave up freedoms during the Patriot Act, especially as it pertains to the NSA and the surveillance state. We gave up those freedoms to the government because we wanted the security from a terrorist threat that we'd never really experienced on a large scale before. 9/11 frightened America, and they gave up freedoms to an authoritarian leader, George Bush at that time, who promised security in exchange for your personal privacy freedoms. Give me a little bit of that personal privacy, and I'm going to scan all of the internet messages out there and stop the terrorists. Even Jeb Bush in the 2016 elections defended his brother, George Bush, as saying he kept us safe. That is the ultimate appeal to an authoritarian leader. So I'm going to give you a hyper truncated, edited version, a crash course, if you will, of what authoritarianism is. Cody, can you play the edited version of the Vox video?
Authoritarianism is not in and of itself necessarily a partisan issue.
For most of this country's history, authoritarians were likely divided between the two parties. But now, only one of the parties really appeals to them.
Yeah, and that's actually pretty simple. If you look at this graph of the top 10 issues that Democrats and Republicans were polled on by Pew Research, it used to be in the 90s we almost agreed on everything, so authoritarians could be in multiple
data over
parties
several
at once.
decades, and they found that authoritarian voters were shifting into the Republican Party. What happened was the Republican Party started to embrace what it referred to as traditional values.
Yes, also, the Democrats were moving wildly to the left and not addressing those bases of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, so what we notice is Americans in general, I'd say a third of us, okay, generally want government to take care of issues, take care of problems, take care of us, at least in terms of our security, and then not have to think about it. Now, some people might call them lemmings. Some people might call that mental weakness. But look, there are fellow citizens, there are family members, there are friends, and that's the way they are. These people are authoritarian voters, and in a time of chaos, they want people to take care of them. Blue-collar workers throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s trusted the Democrat Party to bring order to their economic chaos, their declining wages, their declining pensions. Okay, they appealed to authoritarian leaders who promised to give them more economic security. So within the Democrat Party, there's authoritarianism. Also, I already referenced the authoritarianism of the Republican Party. But now, more and more, if you have authoritarian tendencies, you're going to gravitate towards the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is the only party that seems like it's actually addressing law and order.
There's definitely authoritarian arguments from the left all the time. I mean, the policing of speech on the internet, that's 1,000% authoritarian. 1,000%. I am willing to give up some of my speech freedoms in exchange for what I perceive to be a safer platform online. That's authoritarianism in a nutshell. I want the state, or in this instance, the powers that be, whoever runs these websites, to step in, restrict speech on the basis of protecting others. That's an authoritarian argument. That's an argument from the left.
It's true that both can have authoritarian arguments. However, I feel that the more compelling one is the physical argument. Somebody that is appealing or fearing for their physical safety due to violence from gangs or violence from
What rights are conservatives demanding you give up for those safeties?
Oh, I'm not saying that conservatives are demanding that you give up rights, but I'm definitely saying that the strong man, whether or not he is demanding an exchange of your rights, the strong man will appeal more to authoritarian voters than the weak man.
Well, no offense, but I think people prefer strong leaders as something that's got thousands of years of evidence backing it up. Okay. And we understand this.
Now, would you say that Andrew Yang has come across as the strong man in the room that will be law and order and provide for Maslow's hierarchy of needs from the bottom to the top or from the top down? Because right now, I got to tell you, it seems like he's a novelty candidate in some of these interviews. He's not acting like, the elephant in the room, pardon the pun, or acting like the silverback gorilla that's about to attack the outsider, okay? He's not coming across as a strong man. And we're getting more and more and more authoritarian in how we vote. We're getting more and more tribalistic in how we vote.
What part of $1,000 a month to help pay for food, water, warmth, and rest isn't addressing the bottom of the hierarchy?
Okay, it does.
What part of
I don't think
making
he's
sure
hitting it
that
hard
large
enough.
corporations are paying their share of taxes to fund safety, security for the rest of the citizenry isn't addressing that part of the hierarchy? I don't understand.
I'm not saying that Andrew Yang's platform doesn't have an authoritarian appeal. I'm saying that he is not utilizing the most authoritarian aspects of his platform first in order to make his platform the most powerful. I think he needs to start really heavily talking law and order on the border, that I'm going to give $1,000 to everybody, and I'm going to provide for you in a time of automation chaos, okay, and a world of chaos. I will bring order and stability and independence to your life by giving you $1,000 a month. And guess what? I'm going to have to seal the border, okay, not because we hate the outsiders, Not because we don't like people with a different color skin, but because I need to know who's a citizen that deserves this money and who is not. And we will give a path of citizenship to these great people that need to come in here because we're a nation of immigrants. But I will end that small threat that people see from whether they think it's drugs or whether they think it's terrorists or whatever. If he can modify his argument and actually study the phenomena of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism actually predetermines whether or not you're going to be a Trump supporter better than any other single psychological marker out there, regardless of age, race, creed, or anything.
I don't believe that at all.
Well, I mean, the data, there's been multiple...
What data? Whose data? From who? Paid for by who? Funded by who? For what reason?
Okay, there's some infamous studies.
All I'm saying is that, like, as they said in that Vox video, there's both left and right authoritarian arguments. At the end of the day, if you're willing to cede rights to an authority figure for protections, that is not unique to either party.
I think
that's part of politics. Hey, if
that's
we're going to
the
get
official
this done,
Merriam-Webster definition. The official Merriam-Webster definition requires that an authoritarian leader be requesting some kind of loss of rights in exchange for his authority. But I think the layman's definition is more just appearing as a strong man who's law and order and who is the big guy in the room.
I reject that entirely. No, it's not authoritarian. Law and order.
The strongman argument, I think, is
enforce the laws on the book is not an authoritarian position.
At the end of the day, Rick Scott won an election. He won a
he
very tight election.
Is Rick Scott an authoritarian?
No, but I think he's definitely far more the law and order candidate. Absolutely.
Oh, but like I said, people like seeing laws we've agreed on to be enforced. That has nothing to do with ceding rights to the state.
Then what are all of the Democrats out doing? Talking about how we need open borders and how all of the laws that we all have agreed on and mutually, and have collectively bargained shall not be enforced.
Which has nothing to do with authoritarianism. Yes, it frustrates people when we decide that we should have these laws and someone says, I don't think we should enforce those laws. What do you mean it has nothing to do with authoritarianism?
All of the authoritarian voters are completely turned off by that. And no matter what their color, no matter what their creed, an authoritarian voter is somebody that, when tested, tests highly in authoritarianism. For example, there was a very infamous study that was done of a very large sample by, not the University of Massachusetts. I'm totally botching the name right now, but it's in the Washington Post article. Okay. And when asked, for example, parenting your children, do you think it is more important that they be obedient or independent? Do you think it's more important that they have respect for elders or they be creative? And then by people actually answering these questions, we were able to create an index of authoritarianism. And those that answered the questions in the most authoritarian way were the highest correlated to the votership of Donald Trump.
But those are
more so than their
questions.
age, their race, the money they made. There was more correlation between somebody's tendency to answer a questionnaire in an authoritarian matter than any other factor out there.
I don't think I want my kids to listen to me as an authoritarian position. I think it's most people would prefer their kids listen to them.
Okay, if I were to put this in one sentence, because we got to wrap up this podcast, I would say that Donald Trump is appealing to authoritarians across the spectrum far better than any other candidate out there because he's coming across as a law and order candidate. Google Donald Trump, I am the law and order candidate, and you will see 50 rallies of 2016 where he pitches himself as the law and order candidate in a time of chaos. This is the colloquial definition of authoritarianism. Okay, it's also a definition of many other things, but that appeals to
the definition that's used by pretty much anywhere that defines words. I swear, I looked up. If you want, I'll flip through them. Here's one definition: a form of government in which the ruler is an absolute dictator, not restricted by constitution or laws. That actually is something that comes up repeatedly when you look up authoritarianism. They reference time and time again the sense of
dictators are all authoritarians. Yes,
a leader that operates without any constitutional control. Tell me which party is saying we don't want constitutional control.
No, that's a form of government, not a form of personality. And I'm just talking about somebody can come across as being the strong man in the room.
How about this one? How about this definition? You agree with this? Favoring complete obedience or subjection to authority as opposed to individual freedom.
Yes, exactly. Preferring that the state take care of the problem and keep somebody free, keep somebody secure over the state not handling a problem and the individual person having freedom. But that is the epitome of what the Patriot Act was.
Okay, but what are the individual freedoms that, for example, Trump's voters are giving up?
No, that's why I actually think he pulls off authoritarianism very well, because he appeals to the voters without them actually fearing a loss of a freedom that is very dear to them.
But then wouldn't you just say he's not an authoritarian? Wouldn't that be his strength? Is that he's not an authoritarian?
At this point, I think we're basically just parsing words. I just want to say that I really feel like in the Democratic debates, Andrew Yang needs to step up the game in terms of coming across as the strong man in the room who's got the best plan. Okay? All the other candidates are racing to the left to cry more on camera, to be with more migrant caravans down in Mexico. We got Beto O'Rourke down in Mexico, and then we got Cory Booker trying to help illegals across that bridge or whatever he was doing. And as everybody's trying to pull on America's heartstrings over there, I don't think Andrew Yang needs to be pulling on America's heartstrings. Okay, I think what Andrew Yang needs to be doing is appealing to their most base instincts on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just like Rick Scott said is how he won his elections and how Donald Trump is going to win in 2020. Because unless people can start understanding Trump and why he won, Andrew Yang all the time says, I am the candidate that can fix the problems that got Donald Trump elected. Well, if you want to fix the problems that got Donald Trump elected, Andrew Yang, you're also going to have to start behaving in the same way that got Donald Trump elected. I don't mean tweeting. I don't mean saying grab them by whatever. I mean coming across in a way that appears strongman and appeals to the authoritarian voters. That's it.
I don't know, man. Like I said, I don't see how
he needs to hit UBI like Donald Trump hit build the wall. In that interview on The View, he basically said yes, no, maybe so to 20 different policy proposals, and they introduced him as this nice guy that's got some cool ideas. What I would have liked to have seen him do is do exactly what Donald Trump did in 2016 with the wall. Okay, there were millions of voters who would watch their paychecks go down, watch the wealthy elites that they'd voted for millions of years, and the Democrats they voted for a long time, not do jack crap for them, and their lives slowly slip into the crapper more and more every year until finally he came, and whether you like it or not, and whether you believe his analysis was true, that illegal immigration was the number one issue or not, he said, build that wall, build that wall, build that wall, all the way to the White House. Well, guess what? I think Andrew Yang needs to say UBI, 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 law and order, law and order, law and order, all the way to the White House, and that will get him elected. Donald Trump is doing it. Joe Biden's kind of doing it. Kamala Harris every once in a while does it. Until Andrew Yang does it, I don't think he can win.
I don't think that Donald Trump light is how Andrew Yang wins. I just don't think it is.
He could never be Donald Trump light, but if he adopted some of those ideas, I think he would become the best version of himself that would appeal to the most amount of voters. I don't want to turn Andrew Yang into Trump. I want him just to be a stronger man.
Well, I mean, I agree. People like strong leaders. I would say that it's one of the weaknesses of Andrew Yang is he hasn't came across as that strong leader yet. We had a disagreement off camera about this, but I believe Barack Obama came across that way. George Bush came across that way. People do like to see a leader who seems strong, independent, and willing to stand up for what they believe in. I would like to see more of that from Andrew Yang. To be frank, I disagree in all authoritarian nonsense. I don't think it's anything to do with authoritarianism. People just like to know the person who's in charge is in charge. I think that's what I like to see.
Okay, you're saying if somebody draws a thin red line that they should obey.
I'm saying extrajudicial killings of American citizens overseas is something that a strongman candidate would do. That's what I'm saying. I think deporter-in-chief is something the strongman candidate would be. That's all I'm saying.
End us in style, Cody. End us in style.
All right. Well, please, if you like the video, please like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you know when the videos go out. And throw it back to you for the finish.
This is Problem Solver Politics.